Whoa, it's shared really big. So I'm streaming from YouTube today. Um, I'm really hoping Mittens doesn't. I'm I'm really hoping Mittens does not continue to meow. Um, oh my goodness. Can the audio still be heard if I'm on mute? Oh my goodness. I don't know why she's meowing like this. I put food in her bowl. Mittens, please. You know what? I'm just going to start playing this. Forget the intro. Please read the description about what these are. I would love to. I was going to read the description of today, and I hope we're at number 3 and I didn't misnumber it. But Mittens is having a show. So I'm going to play this and see what's. Again, I have my physical book. I'm going to be highlighting and stuff as it goes. We'll pause for a break at some point.
Desperate, hanging on. Chapter 5. From Earthseed, the Books of the Living. Beware, at war or at peace, more people die of unenlightened self-interest than of any other disease.
The selections I've offered from my mother's journal make it clear that in spite of her near 19th century existence, she paid attention to the wider world. Politics and war mattered very much. Science and technology mattered. Fashions in crime and drug use, and in racial, ethnic, religious, and class tolerance mattered. She did see these as fashions, by the way, as behaviors that went in and out of favor for reasons that ran the gamut from the practical to the emotional to the biological. Human competitiveness and territoriality were often at the root of particularly horrible fashions in oppression. We human beings seem always to have found it comforting to have someone to look down on, a bottom level of fellow creatures who are very vulnerable, but who can somehow be blamed and punished for all or any troubles. We need this lowest class as much as we need equals to team with and to compete against, and superiors to look to for direction and help. My mother was always noticing and mentioning things like that. Sometimes she managed to work her observations into Earthseed verses. In November of 2032, she had bigger reasons than usual to pay attention to the world outside.
From the Journals of Lauren Oya Olamina. Sunday, November 7th, 2032. News. Tucked away at Acorn as we are, we have to make a special effort to get news from outside. Real news, I mean, not rumors and not the news bullets that purport to tell us all we need to know, and flashy pictures and quick, witty verbal 1-2 punches. 25 or 30 words are supposed to be enough in a news bullet to explain either a war or an unusual set of Christmas lights. Bullets are cheap and full of big, dramatic pictures. Some bullets are true virtuals that allow people to experience safely hurricanes, epidemics, fires, and mass murder. Hell of a kick. Well-made news discs, on the other hand, or good satellite news services cost more. Gray and Emery Moore and 1 or 2 others say news bullets are enough. They say detailed news doesn't matter. Since we can't change the stupid, greedy, vicious things that powerful people do, they think we should try to ignore them. No matter how many times we're forced to admit we can't really hide, some of us still find ways to try. Well, we can't hide, so it's best to pay attention to what goes on. The more we know, the better we'll be able to survive. So we subscribe to a good phone news service, and now and then we buy detailed world news discs. The whole business makes me long for free broadcast radio, like the kind we had when I was a kid, but it's almost non existent in this area. We listen to what little is left when we go into one of the larger towns. We can hear more now because the truck's radio picks up more than our little pocket radios can. So, here are some of the most significant news items of the past week. We listened to some of them on the New World Disc today after gathering. Alaska is still claiming to be an independent nation, and it seems to have gotten into an even closer, more formal alliance with Canada and Russia. Northerners sticking together, I suppose. Bankole shrugged when he heard that and shook his head. Why not? He said. They've got all the money. Thanks to climate change, they do have most of it. The climate is still changing, warming. It's supposed to settle at a new stable state someday. Until then, we'll go on getting a lot of violent, erratic weather around the world. Sea level is still rising and chewing away at low-lying coastal areas, like the sand dunes that used to protect Humboldt Bay and Arcata Bay just north of us. Half the crops in the Midwest and South are still withering from the heat, drowning in floods, or being torn to pieces by winds, so food prices are still high. The warming has made tropical diseases like malaria and dengue normal parts of life in the warm, wet Gulf Coast and southern Atlantic coast states. But people are beginning to adapt. There's less cholera, for instance, and less hepatitis. There are fewer of all the diseases that result from bad sanitation, spoiled food, or malnutrition. People boil the water they drink in cities where there's a problem, and in squatter settlements with their open sewers, ditches. There are more gardens, and old-fashioned skills in food preservation are being revived. People barter for goods and services where cash is rare. They use hand tools and draft animals where there's no money for fuel or no power equipment left. Life is getting better, but that won't stop a war if politicians and business people decide it's to their advantage to have one. There are plenty of wars going on around the world now. Kenya and Tanzania are fighting. I haven't yet heard why. Bolivia and Peru are having another border dispute. Pakistan and Afghanistan have joined forces in a religious war against India. One part of Spain is fighting against another. Greece and Turkey are on the edge of war, and Egypt and Libya are slaughtering one another. China, like Spain, is tearing at itself. War is very popular these days. I suppose we should be grateful that there hasn't been another nuclear exchange. The one 3 years ago between Iran and Iraq scared the hell out of everyone. After it happened, there must have been peace all over the world for maybe 3 months. People who had hated one another for generations found ways to talk peace. But insult by insult, expediency by expediency, ceasefire violation by ceasefire violation, most of the peace talks broke down. It's always been much easier to make war than to make peace. Back in this country, in Dallas, Texas, some fool of a rich boy went adventuring among the free poor of a big squatter settlement. He wound up wearing the latest in electronic convict control devices, also known as slave collars, dog collars, and choke chains. And with the collar to encourage him, he learned to make himself useful to a local pimp. I've heard that the new collars are damn sophisticated. The old ones, worn more often as belts, could only cause pain. They delivered shocks and sometimes damaged or killed people. The new collars don't kill, and they can be worn for months or years at a time and used often to deliver punishment. They're programmed to resist being removed or destroyed by delivering jolts of pain severe enough to cause unconsciousness. I've heard that some collars can also give cheap, delicious rewards of pleasure for good behavior by encouraging changes in brain chemistry, stimulating the wearer to produce endorphins. I don't know whether that's true, but if it is, the whole business sounds a little like being a sharer, except that instead of sharing what other people feel, the wearer feels whatever the person holding the control unit wants him to feel. This could initiate a whole new level of slavery. After a while, needing the pleasure, fearing the pain, and always being desperate to please the master could become a person's whole life. I've heard that some collared people kill themselves, not because they can't stand the pain, but because they can't stand the degree of slavishness to which they find themselves descending. The Texas boy's father spent a lot of money. He hired private cops, the kind who'll do anything if you pay them enough, and they sliced through the squatter camp as though it were a ripe melon until they found the boy. And with that, bingo, slavery was discovered in Texas in 2032. Innocent people, not criminals or indigents, were being held against their wills and used for immoral purposes. How about that? What I'd like to see is a state of the union where slavery isn't being practiced. Here's another news item. On the planet Mars, living multicellular organisms have been discovered. Sort of. They're very small and very strange inside. Although outside they look like tiny slugs, some of the time. They live at least 4 meters down in certain polar rock formations, and they're not exactly animals. They're a little like terrestrial slime molds. And like slime molds, they go through independent single-celled stages during which they eat their way through the rocks, multiplying by dividing, resembling little antifreeze-filled amoeba. When they've exhausted the food supply in their immediate neighborhoods, they unite into slug-like multicellular masses to travel to new sites where the minerals they ingest are available. They don't reproduce in their slug form as terrestrial slime molds do. They seem to need the slug form only to produce enough of their corrosive antifreeze solution to enable them to migrate through rock to a fresh supply of food. They make soil in 2 ways. They eat minerals, pass these through their bodies, and shed a dust so fine and so slippery that, like graphite, it can work as a kind of lubricant. And they ooze through the rocks in their slug form, their corrosive slime dissolving trails, cracks, and making more dust. These creatures are living Martians. So far, though, all the specimens captured and examined at Leal Station died soon after being taken from their cold, rocky home. For that reason and others, they are both a great discovery and a great sadness. They are the last discoveries that will be made by scientists working for the U.S. government. President Donner has sold the last of our Mars installations to a Euro-Japanese company in fulfillment of one of his earliest campaign promises. The idea is that all non-military space travel, manned and unmanned, should be privatized. If it's worth doing at all, Donner said, it should be done for profit and not as a burden on the taxpayers. As though profit could be counted only as immediate financial gain. I was born in 2009, and for as long as I can remember, I've heard people complaining about the space program as a waste of money, and even as one of the reasons for the country's deterioration. Ridiculous. There is so much to be learned from space itself and from the nearby worlds. And now we've found living extraterrestrials and we're going to quit. I suppose that if the Martian slime molds can be used for something, mining perhaps, or chemistry, then they'll be protected, cultivated, bred to be even more useful. But if they prove to be of no particular use, they'll be left to survive or not as best they can, with whatever impediments the company sees fit to put in their paths. If they're unlucky enough to be bad for business in some way, say they develop a taste for some of the company's building materials, they'll be lucky to survive at all. I doubt that terrestrial environmental laws will protect them. Those laws don't even really protect plant and animal species here on Earth. And who would enforce such laws on Mars? And yet, somehow, I'm glad our installations have been sold and not just abandoned. Selling them was bad, but it was the lesser evil. Most people wouldn't have minded seeing them abandoned. They say we have no business wasting time or money in space when there's so many people suffering here on Earth, here in America. I wonder, though, where the money received in exchange for the installations has gone. I haven't noticed any new government education or jobs programs. There's been no government help for the homeless, the sick, the hungry. Squatter settlements are as big and as nasty as ever. As a country, we've given up our birthright for even less than bread and pottage. We've given it up for nothing. although I'm sure some people somewhere are richer now. Consider, though, a brand new form of life has been discovered on Mars, and it got less time on the news disc than the runaway Texas boy. We're becoming more and more isolated as a people. We're sliding into undirected negative change, and what's worse, we're getting used to it. All too often, we shape ourselves and our futures in such stupid ways. More news. Scientists in Australia have managed to bring a human infant to term in an artificial womb. The child was conceived in a petri dish. 9 months later, it was taken alive and healthy from the last in a series of complex computer-controlled containers. The child is the normal son of parents who could not have conceived or born a child without a great deal of medical help. Reporters are already calling the womb containers eggs, and there's some foolish popular argument over whether a hatched person is as human as a normally born person. There are ministers and priests arguing that this tampering with human reproduction is wrong, of course. I doubt that they'll have much to worry about for a while. The whole process is still experimental and would be available only to the very rich if it were being marketed to anyone, which it isn't yet. I wonder whether it'll catch on at all in this world where so many poor women are willing to serve as surrogate mothers, caring to term the child of wealthier people, even when the wealthy people are able to have a child in the normal way. If you're rich, you can have a surrogate for not much more than the price of feeding and housing her for 9 months. If she's smart and you're generous, you might also wind up agreeing to feed, house, and help educate her children, and you might give her husband a job. Chana Ryan's mother did this kind of work. According to Chana, her mother bore 13 surrogate children, none of them genetically related to her. Her marriage didn't survive, but her 2 genetic daughters were given a chance to learn to read and write, cook, garden, and sew. That isn't enough to know in this world, of course, but it's more than most poor people learn. It will be a long while, years, decades perhaps, before human surrogates are replaced by computerized eggs. Consider, though, eggs combined with cloning technology, another toy of the rich, would give men the ability to have a child without the genetic or the gestational help of a woman. Such men would need a woman's ovum, stripped of its genetic contents, but that would be all. If the idea caught on, they might be willing to use the ovum of some animal species. And of course, women will be free to do without men completely, since women can provide their own ova. I wonder what this will mean for humanity in the future. Radical change, or just one more option among the many? I can see artificial wombs being useful when we travel into extrasolar space. Useful for gestating our first animals once they're transported as frozen embryos, and useful for gestating children if the non-reproductive work of women settlers is needed to keep the colony going. And that way, perhaps the eggs may be good for us, for Earthseed in the long run. But what they'll do to human societies in the meantime, I wonder. I've saved the worst news item for last. The election was on Tuesday, November 2nd. Jarrett won. When Bankole heard the news, he said, "May God have mercy on our souls." I find that I'm more worried about our bodies. Before the election, I told myself that people had more sense than to elect a man whose supporters burn people alive as witches and torch the churches and homes of people they don't like. We all voted, all of us who were old enough, and most of us voted for Vice President Edward J. Smith. None of us wanted an empty man like Smith in the White House, but even a man without an idea in his head is better than a man who means to lash us all back to his particular God, the way Jesus lashed the money changers out of the temple. He used that analogy more than once. Here are some of the things that Jarrett said back when he was shouting from his own Church of Christian America pulpit. I have copies of several of his sermons on disc. "There was a time, Christian Americans, when our country ruled the world," he said. America was God's country and we were God's people and God took care of his own. Now look at us. Who are we? What are we? What foul, seething, corrupt, heathen concoction have we become? Are we Christian? Are we? Can our country be just a little bit Christian and a little bit Buddhist, maybe? How about a little bit Christian and a little bit Hindu? Or maybe a country can be a little bit Christian and a little bit Jewish. Or how about a little bit Christian and a little bit Muslim? Or perhaps we can be a little bit Christian and a little bit pagan cultist. And then he thundered, we are God's people, or we are filth. We are God's people, or we are nothing. We are God's people, God's people. Oh my God, why have we forsaken thee? Why have we allowed ourselves to be seduced and betrayed by these allies of Satan, these heathen purveyors of false and unchristian doctrines? These people, these pagans are not only wrong, they're dangerous. They're as destructive as bullets, as contagious as plagues, as poisonous as snakes to the society they infest. They kill us, Christian American brothers and sisters. They kill us. They rouse the righteous anger of God against us for our misguided generosity to them. They are the natural destroyers of our country. They are lovers of Satan, seducers of our children, rapists of our women, drug sellers, usurers, thieves, and murderers. In the face of all that, what are we to them? Shall we live with them? Shall we let them continue to drag our country down into hell? Think, what do we do to weeds, to viruses, to parasitic worms, to cancers? What must we do to protect ourselves and our children? What can we do to regain our stolen nation? Nasty, very nasty. Jarrett was the junior senator from Texas when he preached the sermon that contained those lines. He never answered the questions he asked. He left that to his listeners. And yet he says he's against the witch burnings. His speeches during the campaign have been somewhat less inflammatory than his sermons. He's had to distance himself from the worst of his followers. But he still knows how to rouse his rabble, how to reach out to poor people and sick them on other poor people. How much of this nonsense does he believe, I wonder? And how much does he say just because he knows the value of dividing in order to conquer and to rule? Well, now he's conquered. In January of next year, he'll be sworn in and he'll rule. Then I suppose we'll see just how much of his own propaganda he believes. Another happier, more local event happened here at Acorn yesterday. Lucio Figueroa, Zara Balter, and Jeff King came in with a huge load of books for our library. Some look almost new. Others are old and worn, but they've been protected from the weather, from water, and from fire. There are textbooks up to graduate level in several subjects, specialized dictionaries, a set of encyclopedias, 2001 edition, books of history, how-to books, and dozens of novels. Jeff King ran across the books being all but given away at a street market in Arcata. Someone was clearing out a room so that relatives could move into it, he told me. The owner of the books had died. He was considered the family eccentric, and no one in the household shared his enthusiasm for reading big, bulky books made of paper. I didn't think you'd mind my buying them for the school. Mind? I said, of course not. Lucio said he wasn't sure we should spend the money, but Zara said you were crazy for more books. I figured she'd know. I grinned. She knows. I thought everyone knew. There were 15 boxes of books. We took them into the school, and today we recovered as best we could from the stuff on the world disc by looking through the books and shelving them. We read bits of this and that to one another. People got excited and interested, and everyone carried away a book or two to read. After hearing the news, we all needed to read something that wasn't depressing. I wound up with a couple of books on drawing. I haven't tried to draw anything since I was 7 or 8. Now, all of a sudden, I find myself interested in learning to draw well if I can. I want to learn something new and unrelated to any of our troubles. Sunday, November 14th, 2032. I'm pregnant. No surrogates, no computerized eggs, no drugs. Bankole and I did it the good old-fashioned way. At last. It's crazy that it should happen now, just when America has elected a wild man to lead it. Bankole and I began trying as soon as we could see that we were going to survive here at Acorn. Bankole's first wife couldn't have children. As a young woman back in the 1990s, she was in a serious car accident and wound up with a hysterectomy, among other things. Bankole claimed he never minded. He said the world was going to hell just as fast as it could, and it would be an act of cruelty to bring a child into it. They talked about adopting, but never did. Now he's going to be a father, and in spite of all his talk, he's almost jumping up and down. That is, when he isn't being scared to death. He's talking about moving into an established town again. He hadn't said anything about that since right after we got the truck. But now the subject is back, and he's serious. He wants to protect me. I realize that. I suppose I should be glad he feels that way, but I wish he would show his protective feelings in another way. You're a kid yourself, he said to me. You don't have the sense to be afraid. I can't seem to get angry with him for saying things like that. He says them, then he thinks for a moment. And if he doesn't watch himself, he begins to grin like a boy. Then he remembers his fears and looks panicked. Poor man.
Okay, I'm going to stop it here for like a little break. I know I need to blow my nose. And then this chapter will be the last chapter. So it's going to be 36 minutes. The last one was 20-something minutes. And then at that point, finally brings us to the 1/4 mark, because we start getting to the 100s. And this book is literally 400 pages long. Yeah, because we're going to read all the way to the epilogue. So we have almost exactly 300 pages left until the end of the book, once this chapter is done. That chapter we just listened to was chapter 5. Now we're about to start listening to chapter 6. So yeah, I'll press it again in 5 minutes. And good news, Mittens is here sleeping, so no more meowing in the background. But let me, if it still helps, I could also read. In the description of these, I put that I'll be hosting read-alongs and sharing reflections on Octavia Butler's Parable of the Talents. These sessions will continue until I've completed the book via streaming. Unlike a traditional book club, these read-alongs are made so you don't need to read ahead or actively participate. Instead, I'll be streaming on specific days and times, and recordings will be available for rewatching at your convenience. This way, everyone can engage at their own pace and capacity with zero accountability needed. I will play the audiobook in the streams for at least an hour uninterrupted, and in the end of each stream, reflect on the book using guided questions online. Well, actually, I use the guided questions in the back, but I don't think we've read enough to really use their guided questions. So typically at the end of the stream, I usually read over some of my reflections from the past 2 chapters or chapter, and then end the live until we have enough context for the guided questions in the back. Yeah, it's a really long book. I've never, other than reading the Parable of the Sower, I've never, and I barely read the Parable of the Sower, so we could read that one next. But these books are like a lot to just sit and read. Okay, 1 minute before I press play on chapter 6. I should have been taking in the first poem. More people die of unknown and self-interest than any other disease. Share that. Okay, let's start.
Chapter 6 from Earthseed, the Books of the Living. God is change, and hidden within change is surprise, delight, confusion, pain, discovery, loss, opportunity, and growth. As always, God exists to shape and to be shaped.
It's a good thing, I suppose, that my mother's God was change. Her life had a way of changing in abrupt, important ways. I don't suppose she was really any more prepared for sudden changes than anyone else, but her beliefs helped her cope with them, even take advantage of them when they came. I enjoyed reading about the way she and my father reacted to my conception. Such mismatched people, yet such a normal reaction. She couldn't know that she was in for other major changes even before she could get used to being pregnant.
From the Journals of Lauren Oya Olamina, Sunday, December 5th, 2032. Spokesmen for Christian America have announced that the church will be opening homeless shelters and children's homes, orphanages, in several states, including California, Oregon, and Washington, This is just a beginning, they say. They hope in time to extend a helping hand to the people of every state in the Union, including Alaska. I heard this on a news disc that Mike Cardos bought at a Garberville street market yesterday. Time to begin to clean up the Christian America image, I suppose. I just hope the California shelters and orphanages will be put where they're most needed, down around San Diego, Los Angeles, and San Francisco. I don't want them up here. Christian America is made up of scary people, and I find it impossible to believe that they intend only to do good and to help others. Friday, December 17th, 2032. Today I found my brother Marcus. This is impossible, I know, but I found him. He's sick, fearful, confused, and angry, but he's alive. I found him in Eureka, California, although 5 years ago, down in Robledo, he died. I don't know what to say about this. I don't know how to deal with it. Writing about it helps. Somehow writing always helps. Before dawn this morning, 5 of us drove into Eureka. Bankole needed medical supplies, and we had a couple of deliveries of winter vegetables and fruit to make to small independent stores who've already begun to buy our produce. After that, we had a special errand. Bankole hadn't wanted me to come. He worries about me more than ever now, and he's always after me to move to an established town. We could have a nice little house and he could be a town doctor. We could live nice, empty little antique lives, and I could forget I've spent the past 5 years struggling to establish Acorn as the beginning of Earthseed. Now that we've got the truck, traveling is a lot less dangerous than it used to be. But my Bankole is more worried than ever. And to tell the truth, there are still things to worry about. We've all been looking over our shoulders since Dovetree, but we've got to live. We've got work to do. So, Acorn is safe now? I said to Bankole. I'll be safe if I stay there? Safer than you are traveling all over the county, he muttered. But he knew me well enough to let it go. At least he would be along to keep an eye on me. Dan Neuer would also be along because our special errand concerned him. On our way home, we were going to meet with a man who had contacted us through friends in Georgetown, claiming that he had one of Dan's younger sisters and that he would sell her to us. The man was a pimp, of course, a livestock man specializing in lamb and chicken, as one of the euphemisms went. That is, a man who put slave collars on little children and rents their bodies to other grown men. I hate the idea of having anything to do with a slug like that. But he was exactly the kind of walking filth who would have Nina and Paula Neuer. I had asked Travis and Natividad Douglas to come along with us to ride shotgun, and in Travis's case, to fix the truck if anything went wrong with it. I've trusted them both more than once with my life. I trust their judgment and their ability to fight. I felt a need to have people like that behind me when I was dealing with a slaver. We made our deliveries to the 2 independent markets early, as we had promised. Produce from our fields and from what was left of Dovetree's huge kitchen garden and small grove of fruit trees. The Dovetree truck and farm tractor had both been stolen during the raid that destroyed Dovetree. The houses and outbuildings had been torched along with the stills and fields, but a number of fruit trees and garden crops survived. Since the 5 surviving Dovetrees had decided to stay with us, to join us as members of Earthseed once their required probationary year has ended, we felt free to take what we could from the property. The 2 Dovetree women have relatives elsewhere in the mountains, but they don't much like them, and they don't want to be squeezed into crowded houses with them. They do get along with us, and they know that while they're crowded now, they will have their own cabin by the time they're welcomed as members. Of course, they could go back and live on their own land, but 2 women and 3 children wouldn't survive on their own. They wouldn't survive alone even in a place as hidden and protected as Acorn. Trying to live right off the highway at Dovetree, they would be enslaved or killed in no time. Any house or farm that can be seen from the highway is bound to be tempting to the desperate and opportunistic and now the fanatical. Dovetree, as it was, survived because the family was large, well-armed, and had a reputation for toughness. That worked until a small, determined army came along. The attackers really were Jarrett loyalists, by the way. They came from the Eureka, Arcata area, from the new Christian America churches that have sprung up there. They have no government-sanctioned authority, but they believe God is on their side, and the cleansing work they do is God's work. Somehow, this kind of thing doesn't tend to make it to the news nets or discs. I've picked it up by talking to people. I know a few good sources of local news. Bankole bought his supplies next. They're the most expensive things we buy, but they're also the most necessary. We are, as Bankole says, a healthy young community, but the world around us isn't healthy. Thanks to malnutrition, climate change, poverty, and ignorance, a lot of old diseases are back, and some of them are contagious. There was an outbreak of whooping cough in the Bay Area last winter, and it came up the highway as far north as Ukiah down in Mendocino County. Why it stopped there, I don't know. And there was rabies last summer. Several people in squatter camps were bitten by rabid dogs or rats. They died of it, and a couple of teenagers were shot because they pretended to have rabies just to scare people. Whatever money it costs to keep us healthy, it's worth it. When our business in Eureka was finished, we went to meet the slaver at the place he and I had agreed on, just south and east of Eureka in Georgetown. The squatter settlement called Georgetown extends well back from the highway and coastal hills. The place is a human-made desert, dusty when the weather is dry, muddy when it rains, almost treeless, plantless, filled with the poorest of the poor and their open sewers, their malnutrition, their drugs, crime, and disease. Bankole says it was once a beautiful area of farms, trees, and hills. That must have been a long time ago. The settlement is called Georgetown because the most permanent-looking thing in it is a cluster of shabby-looking redwood buildings. They're on a flattened hilltop and can be seen from just about everywhere in the settlement. There's a store, a cafe, a games hall, bar, a hotel, a fuel station, and a repair shop where tools, guns, and vehicles of all kinds might be restored to usefulness. The whole complex is called George's and is run by a huge family surnamed George. At the cafe, George's has a lot of rentable cubbyhole mailboxes where packages and paper messages can be left. And there's a big bank of payphones where, for a serious fee, you can access almost any network, service, group, or individual. This service in particular has made the place a combination message center, meeting place, and Old West saloon. It's natural to arrange to meet people there to transact business of all kinds. Elroy George and his sons-in-law, his brothers and his brothers' sons see to it that people behave themselves. The Georges are a formidable tribe. They stick together and people respect them. Their prices are high, but they're honest. You get what you pay for with the Georges. Sad to say, some of the things that get paid for in the cafe or elsewhere at the complex are slaves and drugs. The Georges aren't slavers, but they've been known to handle drugs. I wish that weren't so, but it is. I just hope they don't go the way of the Dovetrees. They're stronger and more entrenched and better connected politically than the Dovetrees. But who knows? Now that Jarrett has been elected, who knows? Dolores Ramos George, the matriarch of the tribe, runs the store and the cafe, and she knows everyone. She's got a reputation for being a hard, mean woman, but as far as I'm concerned, she's just a realist. She speaks her mind. I like her. She's one of the people with whom I left word about the Neuer girls. When she heard the story, she just shook her head. Not a chance, she said. Why didn't they keep a watch? Some parents got no sense at all. I know, I said, but I have to do what I can, for the sake of the other 3 kids. Yeah, she shrugged. I'll tell people, it won't do no good. But now it looked as though it had done some good. And in thanks, I had brought Dolores a basket of big navel oranges, a basket of lemons, and a basket of persimmons. If we found one or both of the Neuer girls as a result of her spreading the word, I would owe her a percentage of the reward, a kind of finder's fee. But it seemed wise to make sure she came out ahead no matter what. Beautiful, beautiful fruit, she said, smiling as she looked at it and handled it. She was a stout, old-looking 53, but the smile took years off of her. Around here, if you don't guard a fruit tree and shoot a couple of people to prove you mean it, they'll tear off all the fruit, then cut down the tree for firewood. I won't let my boys kill people to save trees and plants, but I really miss oranges and grapes and things. She called some of her young grandchildren to come and take the fruit into the house. I saw the way the kids were looking at everything, so I warned them not to eat the persimmons until they were soft to the touch. I cut one of the hard ones up and let each child have a taste of it, so they would all know just how awful something so pretty could taste before it was ripe. Otherwise, they would have ruined several pieces of fruit as they tried to find a tasty, ripe persimmon. Just yesterday, I ruined several pieces of fruit as they tried to find a tasty, ripe persimmon. Just yesterday, I caught the Dovetree kids trying to do that back at Acorn. Dolores just watched and smiled. Anyone who was nice to her grandkids could be her friend for life, as long as they didn't cross the rest of her family. Come on, she said to me. The shit pile you want to talk with is stinking up the cafe. Is this the boy? She looked up at Dan, seeming to notice him for the first time. Your sister? She asked him. Dan nodded, solemn and silent. I hope she's the right girl, she said. Then she glanced at me, looking me up and down. She smiled again. So you're finally starting a family. It's about time. I was 16 when I had my first. I wasn't surprised. I'm only 2 months along and not showing at all yet. But she would notice, somehow. No matter how distracted and grandmotherly she can seem when she wants to, she doesn't miss much. We left Natividad in the house truck on watch. There's some very efficient thieves hanging around Georgetown. Trucks need guarding. Travis and Bancole went into the cafe with Dan and me, but Dan and the two men took a table together off to one side to back me up in case anything unexpected happened between the slaver and me. People didn't start trouble inside George's cafe if they're sensible. But you never knew when you were dealing with fools. Dolores directed us to a tall, lean, ugly man dressed completely in black and working hard to look contemptuous of the world in general and George's cafe in particular. He wore a kind of permanent sneer. He sat alone as we had agreed, so I went over to him alone and introduced myself. I didn't like his dry, papery voice or his tan, almost yellow eyes. He used them to try to stare me down. Even his smell repelled me. He wore some aftershave or cologne that gave him a heavy, nasty, sweet scent. Honest sweat would have been less offensive. He was bald, clean-shaven, beak-nosed, and so neutral-colored that he could have been a pale-skinned black man, a Latino, or a dark-skinned white. He wore, aside from his black pants and shirt, an impressive pair of black leather boots, no expense spared, and a wide, heavy leather belt decorated with what I first thought were jewels. It took me a moment to realize that this was a control belt, the kind of thing you use when you're moving around a lot and controlling several people through slave collars. I had never seen one before, but I'd heard descriptions of them. Hateful bastard. Cougar, he said. Crock of shit, I thought. But I said, Olamina. The girl's outside with some friends of mine. Let's go see her. We walked out of the cafe together, followed by my friends and his. Two guys sitting at the table off to his right got up when he did. It was all a ridiculous dance. Outside, near the big mutilated dead stump of a redwood tree, several kids waited, guarded by two more men. The kids, to my surprise, looked like kids. They were not made up to look older, or for that matter, younger. The boys, one looked no older than 10, wore clean jeans and short-sleeved shirts. 3 of the girls wore skirts and blouses, and 3 wore shorts and t-shirts. All the jeans were a little too tight, and the skirts a little too short, but none were really worse than things free kids of the same ages wore. The slaves were clean, and they looked alert and wary. None of them looked sick or beaten, but they all kept an eye on Cougar. They looked at him as he emerged from the cafe, then looked away so that they could watch him without seeming to. They weren't really good at this yet, so I couldn't help noticing. I looked around at Dan, who had followed us out with Bankole and Travis. Dan looked at the slave kids, stopped for a second as his gaze swept over the older girls, then shook his head. "None of them are her," he said. "She's not here." "Hold on," Cougar said. He tapped his belt, and 4 more kids came around the great trunk of the tree, 2 boys and 2 girls. These were a little older, mid to late teens. They were beautiful kids, the most beautiful I had ever seen. I found myself staring at one of them. Somewhere behind me, Dan was whimpering. No, she's still not here. Why did you say she was here? She's not." He sounded much younger than his 15 years. And I heard Bankole talking to him, trying to calm him. But I stood frozen, staring at one of the boys, a young man, really. The young man stared back at me, then looked away. Perhaps he had not recognized me. On the other hand, perhaps he was warning me. I was late taking the warning. "Like that one, do you?" Cougar purred. "Shit. He's one of my best. Young and strong. Take him instead of a girl." I made myself look at the girls. One of them did look like the description we had given of Dan's sisters. Small, dark-haired, pretty, 12 and 13 years old. Nina had a scar just at the hairline where she had been burned when she was 4, and she and Paula and Dan had found some matches to play with. Some of her hair had caught fire. Paula had a mole. She called it a beauty mark on the left side of her face near her nose. The girl that Cougar hoped we would buy did have a scar just at the hairline like Nina. She even resembled little Mercy Neuer quite a bit. Same heart-shaped face. "Did she say she was Nina Neuer?" I asked Cougar. He grinned. "Can't talk," he said. "Can't write either. Best kind of female. She must have said something bad to somebody, though, back when she could talk, because before I bought her, somebody had cut her tongue off." I didn't let myself react. But there was no way I could avoid thinking of our May back at Acorn. We still don't know whose work this tongue cutting is. We know that some Christian America types would be happy to silence all women. Jared preached that woman was to be treasured, honored, and protected, but that for her own sake, she must be silent and obey the will of her husband, father, brother, or adult son, since they understood the world as she did not. Was that it? The woman could be silent, or she could be silenced? Or was it simpler than that? Some pimp in the area just liked cutting out women's tongues. I didn't believe Cougar had done it. There was nothing about his body language that said he was lying or being evasive. That might just mean he was a very good liar. But I didn't think so. It seemed to me that he was telling the truth because he didn't care. He didn't give a damn who had cut the girl or why. I did. I couldn't help it. How much more of this kind of mutilation would we be seeing? The beautiful young man moved his feet in a restless, noisy way, dragging my attention back to him. Not that I was in any danger of forgetting him, and he was the one I had to buy now. "How much for him?" I asked. It was too late to pretend I wasn't interested. I had all I could do just to keep functioning, speaking sensible words in normal tones of voice, pretend that the impossible was not in the process of happening. "Buying, are we?" asked Cougar, smirking. I turned to him. I came here to buy, I said. In fact, I would chance making an enemy of the Georges and kill Cougar if I had to. I would not leave my brother in this man's hands. The thought that I had to leave any of these kids in his hands was sickening. I hope you can afford him, Cougar said. Like I told you, he's one of my best. I haven't had to do much haggling in my life, but something occurred to me as Cougar and I began. He looks like one of your oldest, I said. My brother Marcus would be almost 20 now. How old did one of Cougar's child slaves have to be before he was too old? He's 17, Cougar lied. I laughed and told a lie of my own. Maybe 5 or 6 years ago he was 17. Good God, man, I'm not blind. He's great looking, but he's no kid. It amazed me that I could lie and laugh and behave as though nothing unusual were happening when my long-dead brother stood alive and well just a few meters away. To my further amazement, we haggled for over an hour. It seemed to me to be the right thing to do. Cougar was in no hurry, and I took my cue from him. He even seemed to be enjoying himself some of the time. Everyone else sat around on the ground, waiting and looking bored or confused and angry. My people were the confused, angry ones. Dan, in particular, looked first disbelieving, then disgusted, then furious. But he followed the example of the two men. He kept quiet. He sat staring at the ground, his face expressionless. Travis watched me, then looked from me to Bankole, trying to figure out what was going on. But he wouldn't ask in front of Cougar. Bankole maintained a perfect poker face. Later, the three of them would have a lot to say to me, but not now. And Cougar did want to get rid of Marcus. Maybe it was Marcus's age, maybe something else, but I couldn't miss that veiled eagerness of his. What he said just didn't jibe with his body language. I think being a sharer makes me extra sensitive to body language. Most of the time, this is a disadvantage. It forces me to feel things that I don't want to feel. Psychotics and competent actors can cause me a lot of trouble. This time, though, my sensitivity was a help. I bought my brother. No shooting, no fighting, not even much cussing. In the end, Cougar smirked, took his hard currency, and released Marcus from the slave collar. He had offered me the collar and a control unit, too, at added cost. Of course, I didn't want it. Filthy things. Nice doing business with you, Cougar said. No, it hadn't been nice at all. I still want the Neuer girls, I said. He nodded. I'll keep my eyes open. The young one over there is a real good fit to the description you gave. I turned to Dan. Is she anything like your sisters? The girl and Dan stared at one another, and it hit me again that I was going to have to walk away and leave these children to their pimp. I avoided looking at the girl. Yeah, she looks a little like Nina, Dan mumbled. But what good is that? She's not Nina. What good is anything? Can you tell him anything more that would help him recognize either of your sisters if he sees them? I asked. I don't want him to recognize them. Dan turned to stare at Cougar. I don't want him to touch them. I'd kill him, I swear I would. Bankole took him to the truck, and Travis, in spite of his confusion, followed with Marcus. I went back into George's and took care of Dolores. She hadn't found Dan's sister, but she had done me a favor that I would never have imagined anyone could do. She had more than earned her fee. As for Dan, I couldn't really blame him for his attitude, but we couldn't afford a fight now. I was too close to my own edge. Leaving the rest of the kids, especially the little ones, was horrible. I had been willing to fight for Marcus if I had to, but I might have gotten him and others killed. I would have gotten someone killed. I don't know how to stop people like Cougar, but I don't think killing off their victims, their human property, is the best way. Inside the truck, I hugged my brother. He was as unresponsive as a stick at first, but after a moment, he held me away from him and stared at me for at least a full minute. He didn't say anything. He just shook his head. Then he hugged me. After a while, he put his hand to his throat. He felt around his neck where the damned collar had been. Then he just kind of curled up on himself. He lay on his side in fetal position, and I sat beside him. He flinched when I touched him, so I just sat there. And I told the others, "He's my brother," I said. For 5 years, I believed that he was dead. And then I couldn't say anything more. I just sat with him. I don't know what the others did apart from keeping watch and driving us home. If they talked, I didn't hear them. I didn't care what they did. In all, Bankole told me my brother had 3 active venereal infections. Also, his upper back and shoulders, his left arm, and the outside of his leg were covered with an ugly network of old burn scars. No wonder Cougar had wanted to get rid of him. He probably thought he cheated me, palmed a defective off on me. Someone might once have done the same to him. Marcus was so good looking that Cougar might have been persuaded to buy him in a rush without stripping him to look him over. But Marcus had suffered terrible burns sometime in the past, and Bankole said he had been shot too. When Bankole had finished examining him, he gave him something to help him sleep. That seemed best. Marcus had not objected to being examined. I assured him before I left them together that Bankole was a doctor, and my husband as well. He didn't say anything. I asked him what he wanted to eat. He shrugged and whispered, "Nothing, I'm okay." He's far from okay, Bankole told me later. But because Marcus wasn't in serious physical pain, we could keep him with us. We gave him a space behind screens, room dividers in our kitchen. It was warm there, and we had set up a bed, a dresser, a pitcher and basin, and a lamp. Like every other household in the community, we sometimes had to take people in, strangers who were visiting, new people joining us, or neighbors within the community who weren't getting along with others in their own households. I worried that Marcus, in his present state of mind, might get up in the night and run away. How long must he have dreamed of running away from Cougar and his friends, now waking up in a strange place and not quite remembering how he had gotten there? Just to be sure, even after he had taken his sleeping pill, I went out and told our night watch, Beth Faircloth and Lucio Figueroa, to be careful. I told them Marcus might awake confused and try to run away, and that they should be careful about shooting at a lone figure trying to get away from Acorn. Under normal circumstances, such a figure would be thought a thief and might be shot. We'd had great trouble with thieves during our first year, and we learned that if we were to survive, we couldn't afford to have much sympathy for them. But Marcus must not be shot. You told me Zara Balter saw your stepmother and your brother shot down in Robledo, Bankole said to me as we lay in bed together. Well, he's been beaten, shot, and burned. I can't imagine how he survived. Someone must have taken care of him. And it wouldn't have been your friend Cougar. No, it wouldn't have been Cougar, I agreed. I want to know what happened. I hope he'll tell us. How was he with you when I left the two of you alone together? Silent, responsive and unembarrassed, but not speaking one unnecessary word. You're sure you can cure his infections? They shouldn't be a problem. Let alone, any one of them would have killed him sooner or later. But with treatment, he should be all right. Physically, anyway. He was 14 when I saw him last. He liked playing soccer and reading about the past and about foreign places. He was always taking things apart and sometimes getting them back together again. And he had a huge crush on Robin Balter, Harry's youngest sister. I don't know anything about him now. I don't know who he is. You'll have plenty of time to find out. I've told him he's going to be an uncle, by the way. Reaction? None at all. At the moment, I don't think that he even knows who he is. He seems willing enough to be looked after, but I get the feeling that he doesn't care much what happens to him. I hope that that will change. You may be his best medicine. He was my favorite brother, and always the best looking person in the family. He's still one of the best looking people I've ever seen. Yes, Bankole said. In spite of his scars, he's a good looking boy. I wonder whether his looks have saved him or destroyed him, or both. It seems that things can never go well for long. Dan Neuer has run away. He slipped past the watch and out of Acorn, at least in part because of the instructions I gave to the night watch. Beth Faircloth says she saw someone, a man or a boy, she thought. I thought the figure was too tall to be Marcus, she said when she phoned me, but I wasn't sure, so I didn't shoot. The running figure had been dressed in dark clothing, with something dark over the head and face. Not until I had verified that Marcus was still there did I think of Dan. To tell the truth, I'd forgotten about Dan. My mind had been filled with Marcus, getting him back, keeping him, wondering what had happened to him. I had paid no attention to Dan. Yet Dan had suffered a terrible disappointment. He was in real pain. I knew that. And I left him to the Balters, who, after all, have two energetic little kids of their own to deal with. I got Zara out of bed and asked her to check on Dan. He had been staying with them for 4 months now. Of course, he was gone. His note said, I know you'll think I'm wrong, but I have to find them. I can't let them be with someone like that cougar. They're my sisters. And after his signature, a postscript. Take care of Cassie and Mercy until I come back. I'll work for you and pay you. I'll bring Paula and Nina back, and they'll work too. He's only 15. He saw Cougar and his crew. He saw my brother. He saw Georgetown. And seeing all that, he learned nothing. No, that's not true. He's learned, or finally realized all the wrong things. I had assumed he knew what his sister's fate might be if they were alive, that they might be prostitutes, might wind up in some rich man's harem, or working as slave farm or factory laborers. Or I suppose they might wind up with some pervert who likes cutting out female tongues. They might even wind up as the property of someone who cares for them and looks after them even as he makes sexual use of them. That would be the best possibility. The worst, perhaps, is that they might survive for a while as specialists, prostitutes used to serve crazies and sadists. These don't live long, and that's a mercy. Theirs is a fate that could also befall a big, baby-faced, well-built boy like Dan. I wonder how much of this Dan understands. He is a good, brave, stupid boy, and I suspect he'll pay for it. He might come back, of course. He might come to his senses and come home to take care of Cassia and Mercy. Or we might find him through our outside connections. I have to make sure that the word is out on him as well as Nina and Paula. Problem is, finding him won't help if he's still intent on hunting for his sisters. We can't chain him here, or rather we won't. If he insists on dying, he will die, damn him. Damn. Chapter 7, from Earthseed.
Okay. So this is where I'm gonna stop. The next chapter is 35 minutes. I kind of want to do it, but let's stop. These 2 chapters are pretty good. Gave a lot of background on people who are taking slaves, enslaving. Gave a lot of background on like just more world building, I guess is the word. Let me see. Yeah, in this chapter was thanks to malnutrition, climate change, poverty, and ignorance, a lot of old diseases are back, and some of them are contagious. So we're experiencing that now, even though it's not really bad. We're hearing about like malaria, I think, or we're hearing about like a couple things. But they're not widespread. Maybe 1 or 2 people have gotten things that were supposed to be gone for a while. One thing I noticed was Eureka, California. If I'm right, Eureka, California is really up north in California. Let me see. Yes, I don't know if any of you know, like Eureka, California is like way above Sacramento, way above San Francisco. It's really close to Oregon. So I feel like that's probably going back to the story of people getting to Alaska. Getting to Alaska is hard as hell. Like, and in this book, they're talking about Alaska being like this place of refuge where there's hope. Literally, you have to go through you have to go all the way to the top of California. Then you get into Oregon. Then you go past Seattle. And I'm shocked with you go past Portland. Hold on. Where's Seattle? Washington? Is that Washington? That is Washington. I'm trying to look at the state lines. It's like blurry. I'm looking on iPhone mobile. Hold on, that's where Seattle is? I'm always taken aback when I learn where things actually are. So wow, Seattle's by a lot of water. So then we go into Canada. Seattle's so close to Vancouver. Oh, I'm gonna explore. Anyways, then you have to go like there's a huge gap between like Vancouver and Alaska. Like, oh my goodness. Wow. Wow. So yeah, I'm surprised I'm hearing about Eureka in here because it's not a widely known popular place in California, but I could assume I could see people settling to these places for a variety of reasons. Anyway, I noted how in this chapter we read that like people can't really survive on their own. It said, but 2 women and 3 children wouldn't survive on their own. They wouldn't survive alone, even in a place as hidden and protected as Acorn. So in many places in the country, depending on your economic status, you need like some sort of group of people in agreement to survive and to survive enough that you even feel helpful that you can have children, because this is where Olamina is pregnant with her daughter, who we're also hearing her reflect on the journals of Olamina and whatnot. Oh, and I also find it very interesting that in chapter 5, Bankole was reflecting that years ago he said that the world was going to hell just as fast as it could, and it would be an act of cruelty to bring a child into it. That's how many people feel right now. So I thought that was interesting that like it could likely always be fluid how people see bringing a child in. I personally feel like on social media, of course, there are low income people having babies all the time. How many low income people are having babies right now? I'm not sure. But a lot of people on social media that I see having children are people who at least feel very strongly right now that they can keep their family safe and they have enough to raise a child. So I really feel like when it comes to having children, it might come down to the fact that regardless of the whole world situation, it's going to be a risk assessment of people feeling like, you know what, I think things are safe enough for me to have a child. Um, and that still supersedes the uncertainty of that child's life. Because I hope at some point we get some reflections of Olamina's child, like how is her life going right now? And we're probably getting some of that, but maybe I just can't remember. But it sounds like she's mainly reflecting on like things her mom has said. Then where was it? It was the part where I was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Where like Olamina was briefly mentioning like create like her struggles creating Earthseed, like founding Earthseed and Acorn. But the main part that we got from chapter 5 was like how eerie the election results were to 2024 and 2016. So 2024 and 2016, that's when Trump got elected, and that's where many of the sentiments that are in this book relates to people. And one thing I'm just really curious about more is the religious aspect. I think this book is helping me understand some religious stuff, just down to the name of Parable of the Talents. I was able to read more about that. And that's what I need to look up. What are pagans? Or who are pagans? Because I'm not sure how religious Trump is. Like, I do know that he uses a lot of like Christianity talking points, but is it Christianity? Is it Catholic? Like, I'm not sure. So paganism is a term first used in the 4th century by early Christians for people in the Roman Empire who practiced polytheism or ethnic religions other than Judaism. So it's like it's something bad to say to people. Paganism, from classical Latin paganus, ruralistic, later civilian, is a term first used in the 4th century by early Christians. Okay. Christian term used to designate those religions that do not worship the God of Abraham, the figure central to both Christianity and other Abrahamic religions like Judaism and Islam. Okay, that makes sense. So yeah, I'm just going over the things that I've read because we're just now getting introduced to Marcus, and a lot of the guiding questions mention Marcus and things that I'm assuming he starts to bring up in Acorn as he gets healed. So I don't think we can go over the guided questions in the back. But yeah, so those are some of my reflections. I cannot wait to see how this book continues to progress. I'm very, very curious to the pushback Olamina will get with Earthseed. I'm just curious about the threats that Acorn will have to face, like, because then there was, I don't know if that's foreshadowing or whatever, but like the daughter, can't remember her name, mentioned how like her mother couldn't have known how, I guess, chaotic her pregnancy is going to be. So yeah. Ooh. And also in chapter 5, we got some thoughts or some backstory about like space exploration and life forms on different planets, and how Olamina was really invested in that or in that information. Also, they mentioned ceasefires here. By it says, but insult by insult, expediency by expediency, ceasefire violation by ceasefire violation. Most of the peace talks broke down. And again, we're experiencing at least the news of so many ceasefire violations and no ceasefire agreements. Whew. So yeah, I'm interested in continuing to contend with the things that this book is bringing up compared to now. And also just what does it mean for, I guess, the patterns for someone to, make a book like this and be able to create something that's just really evergreen. Because even if people didn't agree with this book, if it didn't hit as hard as it does right now to people, it still could have hit hard when she wrote this. Because a lot of these things aren't too far fetched from things that I feel like have been happening for like almost the last century, despite like tweaking some of the things in here to, of course, be a little more futuristic. I feel like a lot of these things have been true for some time. And then all you need is your imagination to just exaggerate things slightly. And those exaggerations are kind of basically possible with technological advances. I'm curious to see how the police and the military will be mentioned more in this, if at all. And I really, really I want to kind of post the little poem or sermon from Earthseed on Instagram because, or at least talk about it with some friends, because it says, "Beware, at war or at peace, more people die of unenlightened self-interest than any other disease." I find that really interesting, more so because I feel like at war or at peace, more people die, it really resonated with me. Because I've been thinking about the idea that whether or not in the next few years people die from by not being able to survive or fend for themselves as the world progresses, it's not always that people simply just die. People starve, people get abused, people get evicted, people get homeless, people get unemployed, which is so many things happening now. So I find that the things happening now are a result of a variety of things. But in the personal reflections of like, how much should you be foreseeing and preparing for so you don't face certain consequences now? How many people, and we never really get to say, I successfully was able to prevent something that was going to happen to me. Because you don't always know what's going to happen to you. For example, we normalize, if someone has a family that is in and out of prison, they are likely going to be in and out of prison and they can avoid that. And then that person, if they avoid it, can successfully say, I've avoided something that was likely going to happen to me. But when it comes to unemployment, when it comes to eviction, when it comes to starving, a lot of us don't think, I successfully prevented starving. I successfully prevented becoming unemployed. I successfully prevented death by suicide or whatever. So that's the things that I find interesting, is that it feels like even people like me are trying to communicate to people like, hey, these are things that you want to like prevent happening to you, like as the world kind of crumbles. But at the same time, that will never resonate. That will never resonate. We pick and choose like what we're able to recognize as humans, what we've been able to successfully prevent in our lives. Kobe said, yeah, I feel that it hit me when like what humans could really do and how things like this are already happening. Yeah. And it seems like this book, I don't know if this book is going to take a turn where we are talking a little bit more galactic. I'm not sure. It feels like that's supposed to be coming, some galactic kind of stuff, or maybe that's just in theory or something in the book, or maybe that's a part of like Earthseed's sermons is something that is extraterrestrial worldly connections, but it's not actually real in this world. Who knows? Or maybe that's something Olamina's daughter talks to us more about, since she continues to live in this world until like what, 2050, 2060. So she tells us more about that stuff. Who knows? So yeah, there's a lot that I'm excited to get to by the end of this book. Hold on, I'm like, was there a picture of? I could have sworn I just seen a picture of Octavia Butler here. Hold on, before I finish before I get off here, I think I'm going to read a little bit about the author. What the hell? I could have sworn I just saw a picture, and I don't see it. Oh, it's literally the last cover. It's a picture of Octavia Butler. Okay, so about the author. Octavia Butler she was born 1947, died 2006, was the first Black woman to come to international prominence as a science fiction writer, incorporating powerful, spare language and rich, well-developed characters. Her work tackled race, gender, religion, poverty, power, politics, and science in a way that touched readers of all backgrounds. Butler was a towering figure in life and in her art, and the world noticed. A critical force. She received numerous awards, including a MacArthur Genius Grant, both the Hugo and Nebula Awards, the Langston Hughes Medal, and a PEN Lifetime Achievement Award. About herself, Octavia E. Butler once wrote, "I am a 53-year-old writer who can remember being a 10-year-old writer and expects someday to be an 80-year-old writer. I'm also comfortably asocial, a hermit in the middle of Seattle, a pessimist. If I'm not careful, a feminist, a Black former Baptist, an oil and water combination of ambition, laziness, insecurity, certainty, and drive." Very beautiful. Um, but yeah, so as I streamed this today, I typically stream this book on StreamYard so that, people can join if they want to like verbally talk, but I didn't this time, mainly to save my free StreamYard hours because I wasn't sure if anybody was going to want to come up and share their reflections. But Colby, if you want, you could feel free to write in the chat, or next week I'll be back on StreamYard so that people can join to talk. Because on YouTube, like itself, you can't invite guests unless you do it like at the very beginning. So yeah, I'll let that sit for 2 more minutes and then I'll end, and we'll be back next week to read hopefully chapter 7 and 8. That'd be nice. Chapter 8 is not that long, so we'll definitely be able to read 7 and 8. All right. So I will see you all next week. And yeah,